College football fans, have you ever witnessed a moment so shocking that it completely rewrites everything you thought you knew about a rivalry? Well, what happened between Georgia and Mississippi State wasn't just an upset. It was a seismic shift that nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, saw coming. For decades, this matchup has followed a predictable script. Georgia rolls into Starkville as the heavy favorite. Mississippi State puts up a fight for maybe a quarter or two, and then the Bulldogs impose their will and cruise to victory. That's been the story for years. But sometimes, the most established narratives get completely torn apart in ways that leave everyone scratching their heads. Before we dive into what actually transpired, let me paint you the picture of just how improbable this outcome truly was. Georgia entered this game riding a wave of dominance that stretched back multiple seasons. We're talking about a program that had systematically dismantled opponent after opponent, building a reputation as one of the most consistent powerhouses in all of college football. Their winning streak against unranked teams had reached legendary status, and Mississippi State was supposed to be just another victim in that long line of conquered foes. But here's where it gets interesting. Sometimes the most shocking upsets don't come from nowhere. They build slowly, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, while everyone's focused on the sunny skies. And if you knew what to look for, there were warning signs that suggested this Georgia team might be more vulnerable than anyone realized. The Bulldogs had been playing with fire all season long. Game after game, they found ways to escape with victories, but those who watched closely could see the cracks forming in what appeared to be an impenetrable foundation. Their defensive secondary had developed concerning tendencies, showing lapses in coverage that more explosive offenses could potentially exploit. The offensive line, despite preseason expectations of dominance, had been inconsistent in ways that created pressure on their entire offensive system. Meanwhile, Mississippi State was quietly building something special behind the scenes. Their passing attack had been generating explosive plays at a rate that led the entire SEC, creating big chunk gains that could change the complexion of any game in an instant. Coach Jeff Lebby had been installing an offensive system designed to create mismatches and confusion for opposing defenses, and while the results hadn't always shown up on the scoreboard, the foundation was being laid for something significant. The atmosphere in Starkville that night was electric in a way that even long-time observers hadn't experienced in years. Davis-Wade Stadium was rocking with an energy that seemed to feed directly into the Mississippi State players' confidence levels. The traditional cowbell noise created a wall of sound that made communication nearly impossible for the visiting team, and you could sense from the opening kickoff that something different was brewing. Georgia came out executing their typical game plan, trying to establish their rushing attack and control the line of scrimmage. For the first few possessions, everything appeared to be following the expected script. The Bulldogs moved the ball methodically. Their offensive line created running lanes, and their defense showed the kind of discipline that had made them so successful throughout the season. But football games aren't won in the first quarter, and what happened next would shake the college football world to its core. Mississippi State's offensive coordinator had spent weeks preparing a game plan specifically designed to attack Georgia's identified weaknesses. They had studied every snap of film, analyzed every tendency, and crafted an approach that would put maximum pressure on the areas where the Bulldogs struggled most. When they finally unleashed this strategy, the results were immediate and devastating. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came when Mississippi State's quarterback began finding receivers in spaces that Georgia's secondary simply couldn't cover. These weren't lucky breaks or fluky plays. These were precision strikes that exploited specific vulnerabilities in Georgia's defensive scheme. And they kept coming with a frequency that left the Bulldogs' coaching staff scrambling to make adjustments. What made this performance even more remarkable was the way Mississippi State's entire team seemed to elevate their play simultaneously. The offensive line, which had struggled in previous games, suddenly began providing the kind of protection that allowed their skill position players to operate with confidence. The running game found gaps that shouldn't have existed against Georgia's typically stout front seven. The defense began creating turnovers and short fields that gave their offense even more opportunities to build momentum. But perhaps most shocking of all was the way Mississippi State handled the pressure of the moment. In previous years, when they had built early leads against superior opponents, they had often wilted under the weight of expectation. They would make crucial mistakes at pivotal moments, allowing their opponents to seize control and turn potential upsets into comfortable victories for the favored team. This time was different. Every time Georgia mounted a response, Mississippi State had an answer ready. When the Bulldogs scored to cut into the lead, the Bulldogs came right back with another explosive play. When Georgia's defense made adjustments to slow down one aspect of Mississippi State's attack, the Bulldogs simply shifted to a different part of their game plan and continued moving the ball effectively. The turning point came in the third quarter when Mississippi State faced a crucial fourth down situation deep in Georgia territory. In previous years, this would have been the moment where the pressure got to them, where they would settle for a field goal or make the conservative choice that allowed their opponent to maintain control of the game's momentum. Instead, they made the bold decision to go for the touchdown, and when their quarterback found his receiver in the corner of the end zone, you could feel the entire stadium erupt with a realization that something truly special was happening. Georgia's response to falling behind revealed just how much this unexpected challenge had disrupted their typical rhythm and confidence. Their offensive play calling became more desperate, their execution less precise, and their body language suggested a team that was genuinely rattled for the first time all season. The Bulldogs, who had looked so dominant in previous weeks, suddenly appeared vulnerable and uncertain, as if they couldn't quite believe what was happening to them. Meanwhile, Mississippi State continued to execute their game plan with a precision and confidence that seemed to grow with each successful play. Their crowd noise reached levels that made it nearly impossible for Georgia to communicate effectively. Their players were making catches and tackles that they might not have made in other games. And their coaching staff was making the kind of strategic decisions that championship teams make in crucial moments. The statistical story of this game tells only part of what made this upset so remarkable. Yes, Mississippi State outgained Georgia in total yards. Yes, they controlled time of possession and won the turnover battle. But numbers alone can't capture the way they systematically dismantled a team that had looked virtually unbeatable for the better part of 2 seasons. What we witnessed wasn't just a football game. It was a complete deconstruction of assumptions about program hierarchy, about talent gaps, and about what's possible when preparation meets opportunity in the most unlikely circumstances. This wasn't a case of Georgia playing poorly and gifting an upset to an inferior opponent. This was Mississippi State rising to a level that nobody knew they possessed and outplaying a championship-caliber team in every phase of the game. The implications of this result extend far beyond just one game or one season. It sends shockwaves through recruiting, through playoff discussions, through the entire landscape of college football power structures. When a result this unexpected occurs, it forces everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew about these programs and about the sport itself. The ripple effects of this stunning upset began manifesting immediately in ways that nobody anticipated. College football analysts, who had spent years confidently predicting outcomes, suddenly found themselves questioning every assumption they had made about program trajectories and competitive balance. The betting markets, which had installed Georgia as substantial favourites, experienced the kind of chaos that sends shockwaves through the entire industry. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. The aftermath revealed just how many people had been waiting for something exactly like this to happen. Social media exploded with reactions from fans across the country who had grown tired of the same predictable outcomes dominating college football headlines. This wasn't just Mississippi State fans celebrating an unexpected victory. This was college football enthusiasts everywhere, recognizing that they had witnessed something that reminded them why they fell in love with the sport in the first place. Georgia's locker room, after the game, painted a picture of genuine disbelief. Players who had become accustomed to winning with a certain level of comfort suddenly found themselves grappling with emotions they hadn't experienced in years. The coaching staff faced questions about preparation, about adjustments, about whether they had perhaps taken their opponent too lightly, despite all their public statements about respecting every team on their schedule. What emerged from interviews and press conferences was a team that genuinely hadn't seen this coming. They had prepared for Mississippi State's tendencies, studied their personnel, and developed a game plan designed to neutralize their strengths. But preparation only matters when execution follows. And on this particular night, Georgia discovered that their margin for error was much smaller than they had realized. The national media reaction provided perhaps the most telling indication of just how seismic this upset truly was. Commentators who rarely showed genuine surprise found themselves stumbling over their words as they tried to process what they had witnessed. The usual cliches about any given Saturday and competitive balance felt inadequate when faced with a result that challenged fundamental assumptions about these two programs. Mississippi State's celebration wasn't just about winning a football game. It was about proving that years of building, developing, and believing could culminate in moments that justify every sacrifice made along the way. Their players stormed the field with an energy that spoke to how much this victory meant not just to them personally, but to an entire fan base that had endured years of disappointment and near misses. The strategic elements that led to this upset reveal a masterclass in game planning and execution under pressure. Mississippi State's coaching staff had identified specific weaknesses in Georgia's approach that could be exploited with the right combination of play calling and player performance. More importantly, they had prepared their team mentally for the kind of sustained excellence required to not just compete with a superior opponent, but to actually defeat them. Every successful play seemed to build upon the previous one, creating a momentum swing that became increasingly difficult for Georgia to counter. Mississippi State's offensive rhythm reached a level where their timing routes were hitting with precision, their protection schemes were holding up against Georgia's pass rush, and their skill position players were making the kinds of contested catches that separate memorable performances from routine ones. The defensive side of the ball told an equally compelling story. Mississippi State's defense began anticipating Georgia's tendencies with an accuracy that suggested they had studied every snap of film from the previous several seasons. They were in position to make plays before Georgia's offense even realized opportunities existed, and they executed their assignments with a discipline that prevented the kind of big plays that typically allow superior teams to seize control of close games. Perhaps most remarkably, Mississippi State handled the pressure of protecting a lead against a team that had built a reputation for devastating late-game runs. Every time Georgia threatened to mount the kind of comeback that had become their trademark, Mississippi State found ways to extend drives, control the clock, and keep their defense fresh for the crucial moments that would ultimately decide the outcome. The individual performances that emerged from this upset will be remembered long after the final score fades from memory. Mississippi State players who had spent their careers in relative anonymity suddenly found themselves thrust into the national spotlight, their names trending on social media platforms and their highlights being replayed on every major sports network in the country. But beyond the individual heroics, what made this upset so compelling was the way it demonstrated that college football remains fundamentally unpredictable despite all the analytics, recruiting rankings, and expert predictions that attempt to bring order to its chaos. Sometimes the team that wants it more, prepares better, and executes more precisely will find ways to overcome talent gaps that appear insurmountable on paper. The broader implications for both programs became immediately apparent as the dust settled. Georgia faced questions about whether this loss would derail their championship aspirations or serve as the wake-up call that ultimately made them stronger. Mississippi State suddenly found themselves thrust into conversations about program trajectory and future potential that they hadn't been part of in years. This wasn't just an upset. This was a reminder that college football's greatest moments often emerge from the most unexpected circumstances, when underdogs find ways to channel everything they've learned and dreamed about into performances that transcend normal expectations and create memories that last forever. The recruiting implications of this seismic upset began reverberating through living rooms across the Southeast before the stadium lights had even dimmed. High school prospects who had grown up assuming Georgia represented the pinnacle of college football excellence suddenly found themselves reconsidering everything they thought they knew about program stability and championship potential. Mississippi State's coaching staff wasted no time leveraging this momentum, reaching out to recruits who had previously considered them a distant second option. What made this victory even more significant was the timing within the broader college football landscape. With playoff positioning hanging in the balance and conference championship races reaching their climactic peaks, this wasn't just a feel-good story for the underdog. This was a result that would reshape the entire postseason picture and force selection committees to grapple with outcomes that their predictive models had deemed virtually impossible. The locker room interviews revealed the human element that made this upset so compelling. Mississippi State players spoke with the kind of raw emotion that comes from years of being overlooked, underestimated, and written off before games even kicked off. Their voices cracked with the realization that they had just accomplished something that would define their careers and possibly change the trajectory of their lives. This is why we love college football, folks. When everything seems predictable, when the experts have it all figured out, when the rankings tell us exactly how things should unfold, the game itself reminds us that none of that matters when 22 players step between the lines. Mississippi State didn't just win a football game that night. They proved that heart, preparation, and belief can still overcome talent and expectation in ways that leave us all remembering why we fell in love with this beautiful